We ready for that? We ready to go?
Yep, we are. So this is the December 8th meeting of the Groton Inland Wetland Agency. David Scott is the chair. Staff tonight is Deb Jones and Bruce Lofgren. With me tonight is Eunice Sutphin, the vice chair. So there is a public hearing tonight. There's also a public communications section on the agenda. In order for the public to address the commission, you will need to raise your hand. On an Apple device, you can find that at the top of your screen. On a PC, it's at the bottom. On the phone, it is *9. If you're an applicant, we will recognize you when your agenda is up and promote you to be able to talk to the commission.
All right. This is a continuation of a public hearing. And we have a full complement of people, so we're all set. The applicant's going to make a presentation first. Comments will be received from staff and inland wetland consultants hired for the third-party review. Inland wetlands members may ask questions. Then the public will be asked for comments and the applicant will respond to comment. All right, so we're ready for the applicants.
We are, Dave. I just wanted to note that it looks like Barbara Block has left the meeting. She is a regular member, so until she returns, you may want to, you should actually appoint one of the alternates to sit.
Well, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Ann is a regular member.
She is.
Yeah.
So either Gary or Courtney.
So Gary will be a voting member tonight. You ready for that, Gary?
I am ready.
All right. Then we're all set.
All right, and I'm just getting the applicants in order here. All right, I think we have everyone. Is that your whole team, Norm?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Oh, sorry, there's Norton Wheeler. I'm so sorry. There we go.
All right, the applicant make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I believe Norton Wheeler is going to start us off.
Well, yes, I am, Joe, and thank you very much. This is Norton Wheeler, the applicant representing Mystic River Building Company, LLC, 67 New London Turnpike in Mystic. Tonight, while we recognize that it's a public hearing, we want to try and keep the presentation brief as possible. However, we want to explain to the best of our ability the full picture. So tonight you're going to hear from our land use attorney representing the owner, Joseph Williams from Shipman and Goodwin, our project architect, Peter Springsteel from Mystic, our PE, Norm Tebow from Killingly Engineering, and Ian Cole, our professional wetlands scientist. So Joe, if I could ask you to start us off, please, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nort. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and agency members. My name is Joe Williams. I am a partner in the law firm of Shipman and Goodwin, where I chair our real estate practice group. I work out of our New Haven and Hartford offices, and I've been practicing land use and environmental law across the state of Connecticut for the past 27 plus years. And it's good to be with all of you. I'm proud to be representing tonight Paul and Corinne Devlin, who are excited to build a beautiful new home at 80 Star Street in Mystic and to call Groton home. They definitely chose the right builder to do so, and he has assembled what I view as a first-rate team of professional consultants that you will hear from after me. Specifically, after I give an overview of the application, Mr. Chair, we will go to Peter Springsteel, our project architect, who will give an overview of the project. Then to Norm Tebow, who I think you all know from Killingly Engineering Associates. And Norm will review the site development, excuse me, the site layout and the engineering aspects of the site plan. And then Ian Cole, professional wetland scientist and soil scientist, who will present his report and his opinions with regard to potential wetlands impacts. First, by way of background, the prior owner of 80 Star Street, as I believe the agency may be aware, Mr. Reardon, obtained a permit from your agency to conduct regulated activities on this site in April 2010. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Chairman, since we have a public hearing, to have, and I did ask staff ahead of time if permit number 10-05, which was dated May 5th, 2010, if that could be added, if that could be incorporated into the record for this public hearing, please. That permit approved the construction of a driveway in the upland review area, essentially in the same location as we are proposing now, which you will hear a good bit more about in a moment. And after that 2010 approval, a portion of a gravel driveway was installed on the property by Mr. Reardon. Some underground utilities were installed under the gravel driveway. And Mr. Reardon then marketed the property for sale, which took a few years, but the Devlins purchased the property in September 2020. And as I said, they are excited to move in and for that to be their retirement home. This, after the Devlins came on and hired Nort Wheeler to prepare a house and construction plans, the team observed evidence of wetlands in the vicinity of the driveway. And so, having found that evidence on site, prepared a new wetland delineation and filed this application with you. As you know, at your October 13th meeting, the Inland Wetlands Agency voted to classify this application as a major activity, to schedule a public hearing, and to hire an expert to give you an impartial opinion on alternatives. So turning to our proposal, and I just want to give a summary of the key facts that you'll hear more about tonight in detail, but I would submit the key facts are these. First, my clients, the Devlins, are proposing to build just a single family home and a garage on a 2-acre property. The site design carefully avoids any direct impacts or indirect impacts or disturbance to the valuable wetland system on the eastern half of the property. In 2010, I think it's fair to say from everything that I've gathered that no one involved with either the town or Mr. Reardon and his team identified any wetlands in the vicinity of the driveway location. Either that's because, as the experts have opined, there is now additional stormwater coming from the west of the property onto my client's property, or it was just simply because of the approved work being done on the driveway. But either way, a portion of the driveway area now meets the state law definition of a wetland. Now, by law, the site must have access to it, and it has to be from Star Street. That's the only public street to which the site could have access. And because of that, there has to be a wetland crossing, because as you'll see on, or you have seen on the plans, the wetlands cross the site from west to east, and there would be no way to come in off of Star Street without a wetland crossing. Our team has designed the driveway with the least amount of environmental impact as possible. It is in the location that was previously approved by this agency in 2010. It's a location that is already heavily disturbed. And in that area, as you will hear more about, the wetland soils are low in functions and values, except that the one function that they do provide, which is to convey stormwater flow we will be preserving. And you will hear that the proposed Gabbian basket retaining wall that has been designed for the side of the driveway nearest the wetlands will limit impacts to wetlands, is better than any alternative, and could actually prevent additional impacts to the wetlands. On the subject of alternatives, as I'm sure the commission is aware, by state statute, the question is whether there is an alternative to the proposed activity that is that is feasible and prudent and will cause less environmental impact to wetlands. So that's our standard. Our team evaluated multiple alternatives, and you have a written analysis of the potential alternatives from Mr. Tebow's firm. And you also have Mr. Cole's detailed report evaluating some of those alternatives. And you'll hear more about it tonight. But in particular, our team evaluated the alternative of a bridge crossing over the wetlands. And you will hear that we believe that that alternative is not prudent as defined by the statute and your regulations, because it will cause a similar amount of direct wetland disturbance to the filling that we are proposing. It will not preserve any beneficial wetland functions, and it comes at an enormous cost for little gain. One other thing in our application, you can see on the plan that the proposed location of the garage is in the application because a portion of the garage is located over the line in the upland review area. And of course, it's important to keep in mind that our state courts and the Connecticut legislature have emphasized that an upland review area is not a buffer. It's not a no-build zone. It's simply a regulatory trigger wherein if you want to conduct regulated activities, you need to file an application, and the garage is part of the application before you. The question for the Wetlands Agency then becomes whether the activity is likely to cause an adverse impact to wetlands, and is there a feasible and prudent alternative that would cause less impact to wetlands. Our team will explain that the edge of the garage that's over into the upland review area is still located a substantial distance from wetlands. It will cause no direct disturbance and no indirect impacts of an adverse nature to the wetlands. In fact, our engineering team is proposing to improve the situation in that area of the property with some design improvements that we believe will provide even greater protection to the wetlands from stormwater impacts compared to the swale or ditch that was approved under the prior permit. And last, I know that the commission did receive the third-party review that you voted to engage at your October meeting, and we were glad to see that CLA Engineers has provided you their independent review that concurred with the main points that we are presenting to you tonight. As I mentioned, Ian Cole provided a detailed report concluding with his professional opinion that he'll explain to you in greater detail that there will be no adverse effect on the functions that the wetlands provide. And CLA in its November 9th, 2021 report to you agreed with several of Mr. Cole's key findings. It found that the wetland crossing that we are proposing is the least area of impact. And it found that a bridge would not be prudent. CLA also recommended a couple of additional engineering protections for the wetlands. I know that Mr. Tebow and his engineering firm have provided those. And so you have a second brief report from CLA dated December 6th, 2021, in which CLA reports that our applicant team has properly responded to their comments and they have no additional comments. So we were pleased to see that review. And we appreciate you granting our request to continue the hearing so that we could have all of that information and incorporate it into our presentation this evening. So that's my overview, Mr. Chairman. Unless there are any questions for me, I'd like to turn it directly to our architect, Peter Springsteel. Thank you.
Yes, can I ask that we bring up the site plan as a shared document?
Norm, do you want to do that or do you want me to do that?
I can do that if you'd like.
Go
That's
right ahead.
Okay, you can share screen. There you go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you, Norm.
you're welcome.
Good evening, Peter Springsteel, architect licensed in Connecticut. Work out of 105 Star Street, Mystic, Connecticut, which just happens to be across the street from this property that we're working on. The scope of the project essentially is for a new single-family dwelling, which you see in the upper left right here, and an outbuilding garage, which you're seeing right here. As you're probably all aware, this is a very steeply sloped lot. And it's actually a rather large lot at 2 acres for this district, but we are constrained by the wetlands basically along this area here. You can see the property lines go all the way down Star Lane and they continue on up this way a bit. So we are constrained to build in this area right here, which is essentially a rectangle, by setbacks and then by the wetlands. So we've placed our buildings within those setbacks and pushed them as far as we could towards the upper side of the lot. And then in order to get to that position on the lot, we needed the driveway. And as you heard from Mr. Williams, that this was an approved driveway about 10 years ago when Mr. Reardon developed the parcel next door. He put in some utilities and he did do some work on the driveway at that time. I was living here at that time, so I witnessed all that work. So in order to access our project up here, we do need the driveway. So at this point, I guess we'll turn it over to Norm Tebow, the civil engineer for the project.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Joe. Thank you, members of the commission, for coming this evening. My name is Norm Tebow. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I am a partner at Killingly Engineering Associates. As both Joe and Peter have explained, the driveway access that we are proposing is in the exact same location that this commission approved back in 2010. And there have been, there's been a lot of surmising as to why the wetlands are different than they were back then. Upon reviewing the initial delineation, which if you look at my cursor, it kind of went, more or less in this area here. But when I sent my survey crew out to the lot, they had called me back and said, there's a lot more wetlands out here than what is shown on the plan that we have. So at that point, I contacted Mr. Cole, had him take a look at this area, and he concluded what my survey crew had thought was going on there, and these wetlands do indeed extend right to the stone wall that is actually on the adjacent property. I might note that this stone wall is not the property line. This is kind of skewed to the property line. It does, at the roadside, it does start off, but it skews off to the west as you go further into the property. A portion of the driveway has been developed in the past, and the records that we found for the sanitary sewer line, that there was a permit pulled for it back in 2010, and there's actually a standpipe approximately 150 feet into the lot, which is currently the termination of the existing sanitary sewer line. So obviously, this design will utilize that existing sanitary sewer line. So no further excavation will be required to install that. However, there will be underground utilities that will need to be installed, as well as a water service line. So the additional disturbance within that previously disturbed wetlands area will include installation of those utilities. The original design for this particular driveway came in from Star Street, relatively flat until it got about to the property corner, and then it climbed steeply up to the house. And it was noted that the previous plan showed some grading of about 10% right up to the house itself, which really isn't the best of situations when you're trying to pull out of a garage or come out of your house and just walk onto a 10% grade driveway. So upon speaking to Norton at the beginning of this project, he said that he wanted to do the Gabbian Wall, which we are proposing along the eastern edge of the driveway and extending up close to where the garage is shown, for two reasons. Number one, it allows us to raise up the driveway in the area where the wetlands are right now, without filling and extending the side slopes further out into the wetlands. We have to raise it approximately 3 feet in this particular area. And if we go out at a 3-to-1 slope from when that grade is, that would extend the grading out much further than what we're showing as the limits of disturbance currently. Secondly, this Gabbian Wall also helps us to create a grade going up to about this point here, elevation 50, and then create kind of a plateau where the house and the garage are proposed, so that the Devlins, as they're coming out of their house, will have a nice flat area to walk upon into their garage, and a little bit of a more usable area there, instead of walking out of the house and walking out of the garage, or backing out of the garage onto a 10% grade. It just really isn't. It's not good engineering practice to design a site in that manner. So by the addition of this and the construction of this Gabbian Wall, we were able to accomplish that, where we just have a small stretch of the driveway. We're going to have a 9 to 10% slope, then it flattens out at the top, and we're able to create this plateau to actually do the construction. One of the other things that we're doing is to protect the wetlands in this area, is to collect the roof water from both the garage and the residence, and we're discharging it to a rain garden in back of the garage. And this rain garden is designed to capture and infiltrate the first 1 inch of runoff from the garage and residence roof. This will be by virtue of a 6-inch pipe discharged to a level spreader to alleviate erosive flows. Then it will flow out into this rain garden in events where there are greater rains, or if there's back-to-back storms where you've got some water already in this rain garden, then the water will sort of trickle over the eastern edge to this existing stone wall, and which will also act to further dissipate the flows before flowing down the slope toward the wetland area. The previous design, I believe it was actually called a ditch. They showed a roof discharge to this area where we're putting in the rain garden, and it was defined as a ditch on the plan. So it was basically an uncontrolled discharge. And I think we all know what happens when you have an uncontrolled discharge coming on a steep slope. Eventually, you get these erosive flows down the slope. It creates rutting, it creates erosion, it creates sedimentation, and ultimately, that's the type of insults that may impact the wetlands as the site exists and as after it's built. So the manner in which we are collecting the stormwater and treating it and keeping it in this rain garden area will prevent those types of flows. Another advantage about having this Gabbian Wall here is that we've got spots where it's anywhere from 3 to about a little over 10 feet tall along the edge of the Gabbian Wall. This will prevent actual impacts further into the regulated area. So once this wall is protected, no one's going to go and jump over that wall to get down to that portion of the regulated area adjacent to the wetlands. This really does act as a nice protective barrier in itself by being constructed here. We're going to have a little protective guardrail or a fence between the top of the wall and the driveway. That'll, actually that will act as a safety component and a further deterrent to keep anyone from trying to jump over the wall or hop over the wall to get down to this area. One of the comments that CLA made that actually, when they did their review, there were really only two things they wanted to see. Number one, they wanted me to discuss a dewatering plan, which we provided. So essentially, we showed a sump pit and a method to discharge the sump pit if it's required. So there is a detail for this on the plan, and it's essentially a hay bale barrier. If a sump pit is set up in the area of the crossing to collect groundwater while construction is being done, it discharges to this area. And there are a series of stone berms within there, which will act to alleviate the sediment before it discharges back into the wetlands. Yeah. All drainage from the driveway will come down the driveway to the flatter portion of it, and ultimately it will discharge to the east, making its way back into the wetlands as it currently does. One of the other things that we had to consider when constructing this driveway is that there is some significant runoff from the adjacent property. I think, as the commission saw while we were out there, the lawn on the eastern portion of this property is rather steep, and it comes down to the stone wall. And there's quite a bit of water that collects in this area. So we did the computations for the rate of discharge for the water from this property. And we've designed a 15-inch pipe that will be installed flush to the Gabbian Wall. And we'll have a riprap apron on the other side of it to prevent any kind of erosion or excessive flows, excessive velocities into the wetlands. A couple of other things that we discussed as well. I think we did talk about the feasible and prudent alternatives. One of the things that we looked at, I think right from the get-go, was if we could possibly use Star Lane. However, although it is feasible and a driveway could be constructed from there, the issue with it, first of all, is that it's a private lane. So we don't have the right to actually access through there. Secondly, the amount of wetlands disturbance that would be associated with coming from Star Lane is actually much greater than what we are now, and it's probably close to twice as much, if not more. So that alternative was discarded. Secondly, we did, because there was some discussion on the sidewalk by some commission members about possibly bridging it, and I think Attorney Williams did explain about the feasible and prudent alternatives, and feasibility means, is it possible to do this? So, well, absolutely, sure, we could design a bridge. It could be done here. But prudent comes into play when you start talking about whether or not it's going to result in a better situation than what we're proposing here. We do have to look at the costs and the return, for a single family home. The only bridge I have been involved with, and I think it was back in 2011 or 2012, I did a bridge crossing for a development here in Killingly, and it was for a 100+ unit, 55 and over residential development. There was an actual stream crossing that had to be done. It was kind of in a deep ravine, and at that time there was it was a 30-foot long by 24-foot wide timber bridge that was utilized to access this site. Now, keep in mind that obviously we're not going to go with a 24-foot wide bridge here, but the length here is closer to 60 feet instead of the 30 feet. At that time, that timber bridge with the materials and the installation costs was over $250,000, which when you're looking at that cost to access over 100 homes, it does become a prudent alternative at that point because you can spread that cost over the construction of all those homes. In this particular instance, we are going twice the distance, and even though it would be half the width, you're probably talking about similar costs for a wood bridge here. And keep in mind, it's not just the bridge itself. You have to put in footings and end walls for that. And for a 60-foot span, it would certainly require some sort of a center support as well. So it wouldn't be a clear span 60 feet. There's a lot of heavy equipment that's associated with constructing a bridge of that type. There's a lot of disturbance in the wetlands to put these footings in. And even just thinking about the weight of these things, a 30-foot section of this bridge, you're talking about 7 to 8 tons. So for a 60-foot section, you're pushing 14 or 15 tons of bridge there to put in. And, it's certainly a heavy construction action in order to do this, a heavy construction effort. And in our opinion, when looking at the prudency of such a proposal, it just doesn't appear to be a fit for this particular site. And I think CLA agreed with that as well. So, and then lastly, I want to talk about, I think if I recall, there was also some discussion about, the possibility of using pervious pavers in the driveway or for a portion of the driveway. I think the studies are pretty clear that pervious pavers here in New England really aren't a very good alternative just because of the freezing conditions that happen. They don't plow very well. They certainly shouldn't be used in steep situations, which is what you have here. You have a 9 to 10% grade on the driveway. And even if it were a warmer climate, for instance, where these pervious pavers were utilized more frequently, they're not used on steep slopes. You really have to have flatter areas. They're used in parking lots, or they're used in overflow parking areas sometimes. But for a driveway of this type, it's really not even a feasible alternative for that matter, because it doesn't really give you any kind of advantage for infiltration. We will have some infiltration of the roof water due to the rain garden, and we'll get that first 1 inch, which is the most important part of the runoff to capture and treat, because studies have shown that first 1 inch would be the portion of the runoff where you could potentially have some sort of pollutant. So with that being said, I think I'm going to ask Ian to discuss the wetland characteristics themselves, and we look forward to your questions afterwards.
Good evening, everybody. For the record, Ian Cole, soil scientist, professional wetland scientist out of Middletown, Connecticut. Thanks, Norm. Thanks, Attorney Williams. You guys did a good job kind of summarizing everything to date. I guess just to add on to what everyone said tonight, to kind of revisit when we met the last meeting, revolving around my October 27th letter that was submitted to the record. A couple of key points just to highlight, which I think we've already discussed tonight. But one, with this being an existing lot of record, the proposal as presented to access it is a reasonable way to access this property in a intelligent manner. Essentially, we're crossing the wetland at the narrow spot. We're crossing the wetland at a low quality point, an area of disturbance. This is an addition to the wetland boundary since the 2010 approval. We've discussed, some of the speculations of, the creation of why this wetland is now here when it wasn't before. Partly from, could be due to the original installation or the start of installation of the driveway, basically taking off that top superficial material and intercepting down into the dense glacial till and intercepting the high water table, creating a condition where we get groundwater exfiltration, and we start to see the point of origin of discharge, and then it's somewhat exacerbated by land use changes in the watershed above it, that basically have increased surface runoff as a contributing factor. So now we're left with this new wetland source. The project as is proposed, while there will be a direct wetland impact, it focuses on maintaining the primary functions and values of the wetland, which essentially is the conveyance of groundwater and surface water flow to the down gradient wetland, receiving wetlands. Since the last time we met, the application was reviewed by the third party engineers, and they asked for us to provide some additional calculations to demonstrate that the project will maintain the existing drainage patterns and we're not going to adversely alter any of the flow dynamics of the site. Additionally, we, as Norm had stated, had provided a dewatering plan, another detail during construction to mitigate any potential sedimentation erosion control issues. Overall, I think it's been stated before, but just to reiterate, these plans are consistent with deep soil erosion and sediment control guidelines from 2002 and their 2004 stormwater guidelines. And then I guess, lastly, the discussion of, this, keep in mind, this was a lot of that was previously approved. And it's my opinion that this proposal is an improvement to what was previously approved. One of the main functions is, the use of this Gabbian wall, in my opinion, is a great function and a great way to reduce the limits of disturbance on the site, which is an improvement over the previous approval. That and this proposal, those point discharge points that Norm had talked about, the swale in the back, that was a point discharge, but all those point discharge points have been moved further away from the wetlands upslope and have really been nicely kept within the limits of disturbance, well defined by that Gabbian wall. And as Norm had pointed out, I think it's worthwhile noting that, that Gabbian wall provides a very significant physical barrier between, the developed landscape and that separation distance between that and the wetland. So, you get that unintended benefit also by using the Gabbian wall. So those are kind of my closing comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may or staff may have.
Thank you all. That's our presentation, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the time and attention of all the agency members and the professional assistance of your staff. We're happy to answer any questions from agency members or the public. And of course, we'll reserve the right to respond to any comments that may come in this evening. Otherwise, we respectfully request your approval. Thanks.
All right, Deb, you have any comments here?
Yeah, I'm just going to add a few more, a little bit more information to the presentation. It was very thorough, and I am not going to repeat everything that was said. So first of all, the mailings that were required by the hearing, that they are in order. They were done properly. So the 2010 wetland permit that was granted prior to the creation of this lot. This lot was originally combined with, I believe it's the Linds to the left. So the original owner waited until he had received a wetland permit before separating these two parcels. As was mentioned, the driveway was installed as well as the sewer line. I personally remember visiting the site when we were reviewing the 2010 permit application, and the area where the driveway is certainly was not wet. It was not spongy. It did not have Phragmites growing there. And I a number of other agency members may remember the same thing. You've heard a bit about prudent and feasible alternatives tonight. So just to refresh your memory, I just want to remind you what those two terms mean. So feasible means able to be constructed or implemented consistent with sound engineering principles. And prudent means economically and otherwise reasonable in the light of the benefits to be derived from the proposed regulated activity, provided cost may be considered in deciding what is prudent, and further provided a mere showing of expense will not necessarily mean an alternative is imprudent. As was noted, the commission determined that this was a complex application requiring a third-party review. Bob Russo from CLA Engineers is here tonight to review what his recommendations are and his findings. I'm going to go ahead and promote him so that he can describe that to you and be able to ask him questions if you like. So just give me a minute to do that. All right. Bob, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Great. And hopefully you can see me as well.
Actually, well, right now we're still looking at Norm's screen, which is the plan.
Okay.
So would you prefer?
Actually,
it's up to you.
It would be fine to have the plan up as well. You probably don't need to look at me. First of all, I'd like to thank the commission for the opportunity to perform the third-party review. We do appreciate being asked to submit a proposal to do that. And I would like to then review the work that Ellen Bartlett of CLA Engineers and myself. Ellen's a PE. I'm a certified soil scientist, both employed by CLA Engineers. And we reviewed the plans and responded to the commission's requests. And I would like to go through the primary areas of our work. Just to recap, we did a review of the plans. We offered comments on those plans. We specifically looked at some areas of interest to the commission. One, the delineation itself. Why would such a delineation change since 2010? And two, alternatives that might be available. And what would be the most feasible and prudent alternative for a driveway onto the site. In terms of the comments that we offered on the plans, we requested that a dewatering detail and plan be added because we anticipated that given how wet that area of wetland was when I was out there to visit the site, and I did visit the site after your last meeting and prior to this meeting, we thought that dewatering would be likely needed during construction. The applicant's engineer, Norm Tebow, has provided that, and we feel that that addresses that point. As well, we asked for some computations for the riprap at the outlet of the pipe that's going to go under the driveway. And again, Norm Tebow has addressed that. And we feel that those technical comments were properly addressed. Second, I'd like to go into the question of the delineation itself. Ian Cole indicated earlier in his presentation that there were some changes in hydrology in the area, potentially due to cutting into the soil surface to install the driveway prior to this application and after the last approval, and as well that there were some changes to the upslope watershed that could contribute more surface water flow to this specific area and render it wetland. In my initial letter, I think you'll see that I favor the explanation that the installation work done to put that driveway and those utilities in after the 2010 approval likely cut into soil that is termed dense basal till, which will perch water during the wetter times of year on top of the dense basal till at a shallow depth below the soil surface. Essentially, what I think happened here is that we have what's called the perch water table. The landform that's present out here is what we call a drumloidal hill, a drumlin essentially. The glacial deposits on these types of areas in southern New England typically have some very dense material at a shallow depth, 16, 18, 20, 22 inches below grade. There's loose, more porous material in the initial 1.5 to 2 feet, and below that, very dense material. During times when we get more rain, wetter times of year, there's water perched on top of that dense material. That's a 1.5 below grade. When someone, say, installs a driveway and installs utilities and has to cut into that soil, they will expose the surface of that dense material, and the water tends to ride along the top of that surface in the wet time of year. So what you've done is sort of make a cut and artificially make a little bit of a spring right at that location. And that's my best conjecture. And we do have to call it conjecture because, you know, none of us were out there for the initial delineation and the second delineation. But that is my best conjecture as to why wetland sprung up there, because it's essentially a man-made spring. As was indicated by both Deb Jones and Ian Cole, Phragmites has grown up there. And the commission is probably well acquainted with the fact that Phragmites grows in wet, disturbed sites. So that contributes to the argument that this is a recently disturbed soil where the water, the seasonal perch water table has been cut into. Then in terms of feasible and prudent alternatives, as is indicated in the letter that Ellen Bartlett and I put together, we feel that the applicant has presented the most feasible and prudent alternative. We've been involved in constructing bridges over various wetland resources as well. A operative phrase here, I think, is the definition that Deb Jones read from the regulations that goes to the alternatives being reasonable in light of the benefits, and that cost can be considered. In this case, it is a single family residential lot. The benefits that would be gained from trying to bridge or span that wetland are really very limited. And the costs for doing it would be quite extreme. And we feel that the crossing design is in fact reasonable in light of the benefits to be gained and the wetland function that would be lost. Again, this is in a tip of wetland that was, I feel, recently created. Alternatives are always a tricky thing to weigh in these cases. I can give the commission more information about what I've seen typically, but I would like to mention that as Norm Tebow indicated, a bridge that spans a resource would typically be required for a perennial stream. In the case of a stream not being present, typically Connecticut DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers accept some form of culvert. If wildlife passage becomes an issue, typically you would size a culvert somewhat larger and place some hospitable fill in the bottom so that wildlife could get through the culvert. In this case, I've looked at the area and really don't think that wildlife passage is at all an issue for this driveway. So the type of crossing, the nature of crossing that the applicant has proposed, we believe does present the most feasible and prudent alternative. Having said those remarks, I'd be happy to answer any questions from the commission or staff. Thank you.
Deb, do you have any questions?
Nope, I'd go ahead and let the commissioners ask their questions.
The commission members have questions.
I have a question.
Barbara Williams?
I want to know how far, you said that the Gabbian Wall would be 3 to 10 feet high on the wetland side. How high above the ground will it extend on the west side?
It's about 6 inches.
Oh, that's all.
Yep. That's all it is.
Well,
It's just,
how's that?
it's a 6-inch wall, but we have, there's going to be a protective railing or some fencing between the driveway and the top of the wall.
Okay, question number 2. Why can't you move the house south and move the garage west? Put the pool where you're, this, whatever that little, oh, this loam stockpile is.
Well, we have to run utilities through that point. Put the pool with that, we would kind of go into, the driveway has a little bit of a notch at that point, and it's not going to be accessible. That area where the loam stockpile is shown is about 10 feet lower than the level of the pool is shown right now. So it just, it doesn't make sense from a development standpoint to put it in an area, first of all, right off the driveway, and then secondly, 10 feet lower than the point where it can be comfortably accessed.
Why can't you move the garage? You could change the shape of the water garden and move the garage north and west a little and get it out of the upland review area.
Well, we can't move it north at all because we're right up against the setback line. So that's out, and we need to have some sort of distance between the house and the garage. There has to be access between those two buildings. If okay, for accessing between them, and even for safety purposes. For instance, if there were a fire here, for instance, then you'd have to have the ability to get between those buildings.
Well, what's the distance between the corner of the porch and the corner of the garage?
Oh, it's about, I believe it's about 8 feet. I'd have to pull up my CAD drawing to give you an exact amount, but I believe it's somewhere around 8 feet.
Is it doing this in person? Should have brought a scale.
I think it's even less than that, Norm. I think it's about 6 feet.
Okay. If you want, I could just pull up my CAD drawing here and give you an exact number if you'd like. It'll only take me a second to do so.
Well, 6 feet, that you can't get much through on that.
No, exactly. You can't.
Can't get a
You want to be
fire
able
truck
to
in there.
get through there with a lawnmower or something of that nature. I think that's kind of it. Get to the back of your property, take a walk back there. So it's there we go. I can tell you right here. Oh, I've got about 8.5 feet.
What's the width of your lawnmower? I'm sure it's not 8.5 feet.
No, of course not. It's not 8.5 feet.
So that
Well,
means you could move it 2 feet closer to the house without any problem. I know my lawnmower would go between there without any problem. You'd still have 6.5 feet.
You could also put the porch back up against the north end there, and then you could move the garage some more feet over to the west.
Well, I think that's more of a design question as far as the architectural plan. I mean, there are reasons why the house is designed the way it is. Just picking up a porch and putting it in a place that doesn't make sense isn't that simple to do. There are accessibility, there are reasons why the porch is where it is, how it's accessed from within the house and from outside. And to just say, well, we're going to pick it up, we're going to put it in another spot, which might be just, off of a family room or something of that nature, it doesn't make sense architecturally to do that.
That doesn't affect, you could move the garage 2 feet without affecting that at all.
I agree. I mean, quite honestly, I'm not sure what difference 2 feet makes as far as the impact to the wetlands.
Well, I would like to ask, if I could, Mr. Cole, to address that, Mr. Chairman, because as I mentioned earlier, of course, we're charged with looking at whether an activity that's in the upland review area is creating an adverse impact on wetlands. And so if we're, and I understand that the commission is asking, is it possible to have less presence in the upland review area? But I think the question is whether that kind of change to the layout that's preferred here, will it create less of an impact to wetlands? And so I'd like to ask Mr. Cole to weigh in on that, please. I think that might be helpful.
Sure, for the record, Ian Cole, soil scientist of record for the project. It would be my opinion that, shifting a building 2 feet would have really no measurable effect. You're looking at overall limits of disturbance. It would still be within the overall limits of disturbance. So, the habitat amount of change is already, it's within that envelope. So, a 2 foot shift, I don't see where there's a benefit. So, my brain defaults back to the feasible and prudent alternative analysis, that was just discussed. What is the benefit in doing so?
You don't think that 2 more feet of a grassed area for water to move over has any effect? Is that what you're saying?
Saying it doesn't have a measurable or impacted effect. The stormwater, if you remember, the first 1 inch of stormwater, which Norm, please correct me if I'm wrong, accounts for, say, generally 95% of most of our rainfalls that are encountered. That's coming from both the proposed residence and the garage is being directed to the rain garden. So, we're still treating the stormwater that's running off, still dissipating that flow. So no, I mean, overall speaking, in terms of scale and scope, I don't know that there's a quantifiable benefit there from a 2 foot shift in the building.
I think if I could add to that, a 2 foot shift in the building would add about 48 square feet of additional, additional unpaved area or additional grassed area. And I might add that, all it does is shift it over. It actually doesn't reduce the amount of grassed area or doesn't increase the amount of it, because if you move it over 2 feet to the left, you're going to be taking up 48 square feet on the west side and increasing it 48 square feet on the right hand side, which is, 5/10,000ths of a percent of the site. It's not even a measurable impact at all in any sense of how we computate things.
I have a few questions, if I may ask. Okay. Again, it's Gary Robbins, and let me ask you then, could just remind me, is the road going to be, the road up to the house is going to be asphalted, right?
Correct.
Okay, and on one side, the border of that asphalted road is going to be the Gabbian Wall. Okay, describe the dimensions of that wall again. It's going to be 6 inches high on the asphalted side, and on the other side, you're saying it's 9 feet. It's a drop off to 9 feet.
Yeah, up to 9+ feet. Correct.
So how do you maintain the stability of that? If we're talking about perched water conditions there, are you going to anchor this wall into the slope?
Yes.
Why? Because
Yes.
I'd be concerned about slope failure.
No, it's an engineered wall. We're talking about perched water table in the area of where the wetlands are.
But that's now. But if if I appreciate the theory here regarding what caused that wetlands in terms of digging down into perched water, potentially you could have that same situation all along that road. And
We're filling, we're not excavating.
I thought you said you're going to raise the road up 3 feet. Is that
Correct.
what you're going to do?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so
In the area of the crossing, correct.
I have very little experience with a Gabbian wall that's 9 feet high on one side, and I was curious as to how that gets anchored into the slope, because with time, potentially, given the freeze and thaw that you might experience in this slope, that Gabbian will begin to fail.
Well,
And in fact, it could fail towards the wetland areas to the east.
I could explain how these things are constructed. So the Gabbian walls are essentially it's a mesh basket that's filled
It's a
with.
basket of rocks.
It's a basket of rocks. Yeah, that's it.
A basket of rocks.
Basket of rocks. So the way that these are engineered is that you've got a geogrid that between these baskets. So what happens is, the first layer goes on, and then you've got a geogrid that extends out however many feet that's required. I mean, this hasn't been engineered yet, but it will be. But let's say, for instance, that first layer, the geogrid sits on top of that first basket of rocks. It extends back 10 to 12 feet into the grade, and then you put the second basket on, you fill it with rocks, and then you fill up on top of that geogrid with some well-drained engineered material. And you continue that till you get up to the height that you need to get to for this wall. So as with any retaining wall, whether you're doing a block retaining wall or you're doing a concrete retaining wall, however, it needs to be engineered to be tied back. We're not just stacking baskets of rocks and putting dirt.
That's really what I was wondering, whether or not you were stacking baskets or you're going to tie back the.
No, you need to tie them back. Absolutely. You can't just stack baskets and start filling in behind them. It doesn't work from an engineering standpoint.
All right. I appreciate
And
what you're saying.
I certainly wouldn't sign off on it.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have another question. Let's say we have 100-year storm, and as you said, the water is planned to run down the driveway. It comes crashing down. Do you slope the driveway so that it continues and doesn't go over the wall, the Gabbian wall?
Yeah, it's cross slope, so it doesn't do that. And if it does go over the wall, it doesn't matter. It can go. It's a porous wall. It'll be engineered as such so that if there's water over the top of it, then there'll be water over the top of it. But essentially, except for the area along the top of the driveway where you've got it's a little steeper here. From the property corner to the entrance here, it's very, very gently sloped. So once you get past this corner here, there's not a lot of velocity going down the rest of the driveway, and ultimately the water is going to end up discharging parallel to Star Street like it does currently. There's not a huge drainage area over here too. Even with a 100-year storm, you're only going to have a limited amount of runoff that actually falls on the driveway. You have to remember too that any of the runoff that falls on the roofs of these houses are going to be discharged to the rain garden. So you've got a very limited drainage area. You don't have a whole lot of runoff onto the pavement. It's essentially what falls directly onto the pavement is what's going to happen. We don't typically. I mean, the 100-year storms are a huge amount of rain over a 24-hour period. What you worry about more often is when you've got these rain events where you've got 2 inches of rain over in a 20-minute period. That's those are the storms that create more havoc than a 100-year storm where you might have 7 or 8 inches falling over a 24-hour period. You get these cloud bursts, but the walls are designed accordingly. That's really the least of the issues. If you've got these types of storms and you have these huge downpours in a short period of time, the issue is typically where the watershed finishes and not this small pinhead really of an impact to the entire watershed.
I was just wondering about the riprap, that the pipe goes under the driveway,
Mhm.
and then that riprap thing there must be lower, right?
It's even. It's actually, the pipe comes out, discharges level to the riprap.
Oh,
So
and that's flat there?
It's flat
The
there,
riprap
correct?
is,
That the
what's to
riprap is flat.
prevent all the water from going to that area, coming down the driveway? And is it sized enough for that?
That pipe is to collect the water that flows from the Lynn property, not from our driveway. There's
but
go ahead.
it won't go in there from the driveway?
No, it
You're gonna
won't.
slope the driveway to keep that from happening?
No, that's actually underneath the driveway. So in order for any water from the driveway, we would have to have a leak off in that area to allow the water to drain in that area, but that's not the intention. The intention of that pipe is to allow the water that currently drains from the Lynn property to continue draining like it does currently. And we did the computations for that, and that pipe is sized appropriately that would actually handle a 100-year storm from the Lynn property.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question following that. That seems like a good solution. Is it possible that you might want more than one of those to just spread the stress out of all of the water draining into the wetlands?
It's not necessary. That the water right now is really any of the water that drains in that area is really focused currently on that tip of the wetlands, which is right here. You got this very small area. All the water that comes into from this property focuses right here, and that's where it drains onto our property. So we're capturing it where it currently drains from, and just continuing it on its path that it currently follows.
I was just thinking that it might be a solution for the water pouring down the driveway to the end. You could intercept it at different spots.
Well, I personally don't want to create a break. You'd have to create a break in the Gabbian Wall to do that. And why introduce an opportunity for there to be an issue with the Gabbian Wall when you've got a solid wall there and it's designed to hold up, based upon the geogrid that you're going to put into it. In order to put a break into it and to introduce water down into it, what's going to happen is that you're going to introduce water into the back of this wall, and I wouldn't want to do that.
Excuse me, Dave. Dave, I just want to note that Barbara Block returned to the meeting at 7:07, although she is having some technical difficulties and she's listening but is not able to ask questions. And that being said, I believe Eunice has some questions.
I just wanted to ask Norm, you talked about at the end of the driveway discharge from the entire driveway to Star Street. Is that a point discharge, and do you need a structure there if it is, or could you just maybe talk a little bit more about that?
No, yes, it's not a point discharge. It's actually sheet flow from the driveway. Currently, everything right now, everything in this area flows in this direction. You can see the way the contours are. So what we've got from Star Street is you actually going to have just a little bit of a, I guess for lack of a better term, a little speed bump over here from Star Street. So there's going to be a ridge here. So the water coming down the driveway, it's cross sloped to the east, and everything coming off is just going to kind of continue on its way in this direction like it does currently.
So you don't think that there needs to be any sort of structure there you think the flow is going to be such that it'll just be fine to?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thanks.
If I understood that, you're not anticipating a lot of water flowing to Star Street, right?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not anticipating water. The driveway is going to be constructed in this area, like I said, to alleviate that potential to happen.
Yeah, because I was thinking about what happens in the winter.
Yeah, that's a requirement of the Public Works Department. They don't They want the driveway aprons designed so that the town's water essentially doesn't shed onto private property, and the private property's owner's water doesn't shed onto the street, except in, of course, extreme events.
Yeah, I was just thinking about frozen, the water freezing in the winter, and when you have snow and the snow's melting now and that sort of thing. And
Well, I don't think it's any different than any of the other driveways that are on this street.
there.
The driveway to the Lynn property is parallel to this one. It goes up very steeply right off the road. So you could potentially have that same condition there. And I can tell you that driveway does discharge straight down the hill. Unlike this one, where you've got a nice flat plateau going into it. So you're not going to get that velocity where we will have a cross slope on the driveway. And the water coming down the driveway is going to be encouraged to flow to the east.
How do you anticipate they handling snow on this property?
They'll have to plow the driveway.
You're going to plow it? Where would you put the snow?
You could put it right here.
If you brought up, there's one thing snow blowing, there's another
Right.
plowing, and I'm
Right.
looking at that and saying, where would I dump snow on this property? And they're not going to dump it on the other side of the Gabbian Wall.
No, certainly not. Certainly not.
No,
I would anticipate, probably some snow blowing in the immediate area of the house to clear the driveway here. And then if they're going to be plowing it back toward Star Street and depositing it in this direction over here, where it's nice and flat, and the snow could melt in that area.
You planning on using salt on this driveway?
I hadn't even thought about, I actually, I don't plan on on maintaining the driveway. So I know if that's something that you're concerned about, I'm sure, that's something that the commission could condition as well.
Yeah, I'm concerned about adding a lot of salt into the wetlands. That's for sure. I have a couple other questions.
Sure.
The Gabbian Wall, you excavate to put that in?
Just half the depth of one of the boxes. So it's a shallow excavation. There's usually put about 6 to 8 inches of stone below grade, and then you start constructing the wall.
Now, are you getting water from the Abrams property, which is up that steep hill from you?
Nothing that we saw out there. There's nothing to really indicate that there's any kind of concentrated runoff in that area. It is heavily vegetated. I think, as you saw on the sidewalk, there's a lot of it's just an overgrown field at this point, but I don't recall seeing any evidence of any concentrated runoff. The way that the grading is working in back of the house is that we're grading it to shed in both directions around the perimeter of the house.
And of course, that's going to add to the water in the driveway.
Oh, there'll be some, I'm sure. But once again, the back slope of the house, it's not going to be paved. It's going to be a vegetated area. And the two structures or the impervious area that could add additional flow to the driveway, namely the garage and the home, the rainwater is going to be collected from those two rooftops and conveyed to the rain garden.
All right, what's the width of the driveway?
12 feet.
And where the runoff is there underneath, what's the width there?
12 feet. The driveway is consistently 12 feet, right, all the way down.
Well, the Gabbian Wall steps out at least 2 feet from what I see.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely. But you asked me the width of the driveway itself. The paved portion of the driveway is 12 feet. We do have shoulders on both sides, and so there's a shoulder to get so that we're going to have a guardrail, and then there'll be a total of between the edge of the driveway and the top of the Gabbian wall, there's 3 feet there.
Ah. Yeah, what is the soil type in the wetlands? Haven't heard that.
I think Ian would be better qualified to answer that question than I am.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Been a long day. Good evening, Ian Cole, soil scientist for the record. The question is regarding the soil type within the wetland that's being slated to be disturbed, or within the naturally occurring wetland boundary. So the wetland soils that are being disturbed, I think is the main question. They would be characterized as an aqueous soil type, which is basically a mapping unit designated to capture miscellaneous soil types that have been disturbed, that are subject to either prior fillings or excavations or activities where the upper 2 feet of the original soil surface has been disturbed, so that the natural soil horizons are no longer readily identifiable. Normally, they're reserved for characterizing soils that are subject to seasonal or prolonged hydrology, that are capable of supporting wetland vegetation. The key factor here is aqueous soils basically carry with them a reducing soil environment that's free of dissolved oxygen, basically mimicking a hydric soil. So that's the soil type that's present there, would be an aqueous soil in the area of disturbance.
Now, here's a good question. With this water flowing across, does this qualify as an intermittent water course?
No, you're talking where the pipe is?
Well, I'm talking about waters flowing from the Lynn property across into the wetlands.
No, so to qualify as a water course,
Intermittent water course.
you would need a concentrated point of flow, and basically there's no defined channel here. So you're lacking the defined channel.
All right.
I'm wondering if there's going to be any problem with frost heaving underneath the asphalt.
If it's constructed correctly, absolutely not. Just like any other driveway, if you've got a good sub-base course of some bank run gravel, and then you've got your 6 to 8 inches of processed gravel, it'll be well drained enough to prevent frost heaves from happening. Frost heaves happen for 2 reasons. You see them a lot of times on older roads that were essentially cart paths, maybe back in the turn of the century or early on, before there were significant cars, and then all of a sudden, with the invention of the car and people started driving more of them, they took these cart paths, basically graded them out and threw asphalt on top of them without actually doing any kind of a significant road base. These older roads are where you typically see the frost heaves. I think there are very few roads that of newer construction where you actually see these conditions happen.
So having a wet footing is not going to be a problem, or you'll eliminate that with digging and then filling.
Exactly. What you do is you pull out this substandard material and replace it with a well-drained material. Like I said, typically there's a total of about 18 inches. You'd have about 12 inches of a bank run gravel, and that's something that's got stones about 6 inches in diameter or less. And once you compact that in, then you put your good processed gravel on top of that before you pave. And the process is a 3-inch minus, typically considered an engineered fill. And that's that's what you'd put on top of that and compact that prior to paving.
I do take exception to calling the wetland soil as unacceptable material.
I don't think I said that. I didn't call the wetland soil an acceptable material.
What did you call it?
I said, no, Ian called them an aqueant, which is a previously disturbed area. I'm saying when constructing the driveway, you pull out the unacceptable material to the restrictive layer and replace it with acceptable material.
We could go back in the tape and find what you actually said, but
You may say,
my opinion was that you were basically saying it was unacceptable material. That's a matter of opinion. As an engineer, I realize you want to pave everything, but we've had those in the town before.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can I ask Bob Russo to comment on an issue that came up earlier while we still have him? Bob, would you mind giving us your opinion regarding moving the garage and whether or not that would have any significant impact on the wetland one way or the other?
Sorry, I just needed to take a minute to unmute myself there. Sure,
Okay.
I would be happy to comment upon that. When we're considering whether the placement of that garage would have an impact on the wetland or not, there's information from Connecticut DEP specifically addressing the functions of the upland review zone around the wetland. For instance, vegetation in the upland review zone can shade a wetland and provide cooling for the water temperature. Given the distance that the garage is from the wetland and the type of vegetation out there, you're not going to be eliminating anything that's shading the wetland currently. Another important function is in the upland review zone is removal of nutrients and pollutants. The engineer has designed a rain garden that he's testified will take the first inch of runoff water from the buildings on site. So that will treat those runoff waters from any potential nutrients, pollutants, et cetera, that could come from them, which is very limited in the first place, given that these are residential roofs. In addition, we look at the upland review zones width in consideration of removing things that might be on the lawn, that might be coming from offsite. And based on EPA publications and various studies done, we see that within 50 feet of good vegetation, we can typically attenuate nitrogen, phosphorus, other nutrients, fertilizers, and other pollutants. So the fact that the garage is at the outer edge of the upland review zone and we have a wide vegetated functioning buffer remaining, and the fact that the potential sources of pollutants is really limited, tells me that moving that garage really wouldn't measurably change what's going on in the wetland. And I don't think that the 2-foot move would really change the outcome here at all. In fact, the garage is already far enough away from the wetland that I don't believe it's going to have an impact on the wetland.
Thank you.
How about runoff of lawn fertilizers, et cetera? I know from my own measurements along the Niantic River that the river contains a certain level of nitrates and phosphates. And then in the spring, when we have a nice rainstorm, that amount goes up by 5-fold. Hence, all the lawns that have been fertilized along the river wash into the river. Are we going to see that here?
Well, I think if you look at the overall layout of the site, first of all, the amount of actual lawn that might be, or amount of actual area that might be suitable to have a lawn is very limited here. So I think by virtue of that in itself, there's not really a potential to provide any significant impact. Secondly, based upon what Mr. Russo just stated, that if there's a good vegetated buffer within 50 feet of the wetlands, then any potential nutrients would likely be mitigated prior to reaching the wetland boundary.
Other questions? Staff, you have anything?
No, I don't. I think it's time for the public if anyone has any questions or
Yep.
comments. So as a reminder, if you would like to address the commission on this application, you do need to raise your virtual hand. And then you will be promoted and able to give your comments to the commission. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, hold on. Yes, I am. So Randy Rohrback, I believe. I believe you're muted. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. There we go.
Good. Randy Rohrbach. First house on Star Lane, 30 Star Lane. First of all, I want to welcome the Devlins to the neighborhood. I assume they're listening. And my big question is the lane. This is serious wetlands around here, as you've all seen. And in an acute storm, there's water everywhere. And the lane is a little bit fragile. It all goes from west to east through a culvert that's partly on the Schmidt's property and partly on mine. There's two culverts actually, but they're together. I am concerned that some of these changes might change that dynamic and cause erosion to the lane. And if it does, what recourse would we have?
Well, I could answer that. In my experience, obviously, if an abutting property is having a detrimental impact on your property, they are obligated to resolve that issue for you. So I think you'd see relatively quickly after the construction is completed whether or not that situation was occurring.
Well, there is a complication there because this is a pentway that the town wants nothing to do with and none of us own. So it's, I don't know how we would deal with that, but I assume in your professional opinion, it doesn't look like that will cause further damage.
I don't believe it will. No, the amount, the area that's actually being disturbed here, we're talking it's only about where the house lot is and so forth. It's and the driveway in total, we're only talking about 3/4 of an acre, a little bit less than 3/4 of an acre. It's pretty minimal in the big scheme of things. The fact that the water will be discharging to where it goes currently. We're actually going to be splitting the flows, so we'll take some of the roof water from the house and the garage and discharging it in the northern part of the site, then the remaining part of the driveway in the southern part of the site. So
It all goes to the place.
I know it all goes to the same place, but you're gonna have different timing on it. You know, the time of concentration is what's important. So
Well, it seems to me it would be
the peak discharges from the house and the garage will not be occurring at the same time the peak discharge from the driveway, because the stuff from the driveway has to make its way through a longer stretch of wetlands. So those are the types of things that you look at when you're doing design, making sure that you don't have like a single point discharge where you can kind of create a problem. You try to split the flows up so that you have longer extended times, say for instance in the wetlands, where the flows can dissipate a little bit more slowly.
Mhm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do not see any other hands raised.
All right. Are there any other questions from the agency? Anything we need to hear? No? Deb, you have any last comments?
I don't at this point. Just remind the agency that once the hearing is closed, you can't take in any additional information. So if there's any other information you think you need to ask that now. And I'm just seeing that Mr. Rohrbeck has his hands raised again. So with your permission, Dave, I will allow him to speak. Yes. I guess that's a yes. There we go.
Am I on again?
You are.
I just want to say briefly that I agree with the sentiment that was said earlier about pesticides and salt and whatever running into the wetlands, but then the river's right there too, you know, so I don't know why we allow spreading pesticides all over everything, and maybe hopefully people uphill will start believing that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, other comments? Other information that's needed? All right, then I'll ask for a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Gary, you seconding?
I thought somebody else just seconded, but I'll second, sure.
All right. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? All right, the hearing is closed. Now we can discuss it. Gary, you have a question or a comment?
I'm not exactly sure procedurally what's happening now, okay? This is post, are we still in a public meeting? I mean, or are we having
are,
private deliberation? How's this work?
We're not taking any new information. We can discuss what we've heard amongst ourselves.
And I just want to remind you that while Barbara Block is here, she's not able to participate because of technical issues. So Gary is appointed as a regular member in her place. And I'm sorry, Courtney, you can't participate in the discussion.
All right, and so, you know, I'm looking at the map right now, and although we were focusing on the area where the road basically crosses that wetland area, I wonder what might potentially happen on the other side of that Gabbian Wall, okay? And whether or not there might be some sort of, you know, whether it be something associated with redirecting, you know, runoff or groundwater discharge or whatever, and or as you already mentioned, things like pesticides and salt and whatnot, and because that's right there. I mean, there's the wet, and the other side of that wall is the wetlands, and and that to me, I'm sorry we didn't ask Bob Russo about this, but about whether or not he might anticipate the other side of that wall, something going on the other side of that wall. And given the nature of the soil, again, yeah, I've only had very limited experience myself dealing with Gabbian walls, and this is a pretty steep drop. We're talking a 9-foot wall here, and how that, to me, that along that very steep border basically has a dramatic impact on the groundwater discharge, particularly perched water discharges. I don't know if it's good or bad, but that's something I would like to have seen focused on, perhaps. And I didn't really sort of think about it till now. So, but that's my only comments.
Well, I think the applicant and the expert that Deb hired on behalf of the agency spoke pretty clearly to the Gabbian Wall actually being protection for the wetland. And I think he didn't go into a lot of detail about the construction, but at the end, someone asked a question and he said they would only have to dig down half a foot or so. What did he say?
The height of the Gabbian
Half
Wall.
the height of the
About
first
half the height of a basket, yeah. Mhm.
of the first
No, but
basket.
let's keep in mind that wall is 9 feet high. You got a 9-foot high wall, and this soil basically up on one side, the soil goes all the way basically to the top, right? And then they're going to add additional soil on top of that, and then I'm listening to issues associated with perched water and that sort of thing, and I just wonder whether or not the hydrology could be impacted by this. But in the end, this may be a real maintenance issue, if there is some sort of water failure or whatever. And I don't know. And again, I'm just sort of assessing or guesstimating, okay, perhaps some things that potentially could happen to the wetlands in terms of pesticide, salt coming in, changing the hydrology as a result of having this large wall there. I don't know. And I think, and I appreciate the fact that the engineers have addressed its structural soundness per se, but overall, how it affects the hydrology in the area, I'm not sure that we heard a lot of, and perhaps we could have heard some more.
Well, one good thing about the wall is it's pervious. In other words,
Yeah, it's very pervious. Exactly. So it acts as a big drain on that slope. You're going to start draining water more so now at higher rates than perhaps you would have naturally. And what that means in the end, I'm not sure, in terms of what the effect will be on the wetlands, which sits right on the other side of that wall.
I don't know. I
guess I don't want to suggest that it's a concern per se, but it's perhaps something that should be watched. Something like that. My immediate reaction was the stability of the wall, but assuming they're going to anchor the wall in and all that, I would suspect that the wall will hold up. But nonetheless, it's a huge drain. And the groundwater table seems to be very shallow, at least the perched water is very shallow. And now that water's all going to drain out, what the effect is going to be, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know. If you add more water to a wetland, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm not sure
Not a
what
good
water
thing
is
for the guys
going to-
downstream.
Say what?
The people down the hill, I think, had a valid concern. Just, wondering about all that surface now not being permeable and then sheeting off into the wetland. That could change things.
Well, yeah, the surface is becoming less permeable, but given the groundwater now has more of an opportunity to drain out of that Gabbian wall. So, so on one hand, you're cutting off some water, and the other hand, you're potentially increasing water to the wetland side. So I don't know if it balances out, but you have sort of two opposing effects here.
It's a lot of
On the
parking.
other hand, you can say that asphalt, the amount of road they're creating is relatively small.
What's the lifespan of the mesh that holds the rocks?
Probably, well, it can, a lot of this stuff tends to rust, but it, could be forever. It could be a very long time. I've seen them forever, basically, If you were talking about, a wall, 35-year wall, I don't know what the lifespan of one of these walls would be, but, and I'm not sure what even that means in terms of potentially for repairing it and stuff like this. It's just baskets of rock, and that's it. So if the mesh begins to, erode and corrode and so some of the rocks may come loose, of course, all that's repairable.
Isn't that what they use to build the retaining walls for the Waterford stores? Out by
We have a number of places in stores where there are in fact gabions. Yes. Okay. Yes. And along the dam, I think about the ones we have on our dam and the downstream side of the dam, they're all collapsed. Okay. And also that we're in the process now. I think they're spending a large sum of money now to refurbish that dam. Okay. But we have Gabbian Walls elsewhere, on campus, but I'm just trying to think of them in terms of using them as a retaining wall. That's what you're doing here. And you have a 9-foot high retaining wall and all that's sort of, I don't know, and soil that tends to be rather unstable, perhaps, that can experience frost heave and then perched water drainage and this sort of thing. But again, that just the structural part of this is their problem, It's a question of whether or not the effects on drainage could in fact impact the wetland in some manner, other than that small little strip they're going to asphalt over,
And
at least in
again,
my
you need to base your decision on information that you heard during the hearing.
No, I understand.
It can't be just speculative, and frankly, everything needs maintenance. So I think you should also start thinking about whether or not, is there a prudent or feasible alternative to what they are proposing? Is there a prudent and feasible alternative to the location that they are proposing? As their attorney spoke at the beginning of the meeting, I mean, this is a building lot, this is a legal lot, and the owners expect to have some kind of access to the building site.
Oh, I understand. No, I appreciate what you said. Thank you.
Unfortunately, it appears that a bridge is not a feasible alternative, although I'm not totally sure the amount of wetland activity is happening in that soil since it hasn't been there for a really long time. I mean, the last time was what, 2010. So sometime in the last 11 years it's developed. It's not like we're dealing with a wetland that's been there for 500 years or something. It has a very deep cross section.
I'm not sure what a bridge would get you anyway. And if you're going to cover up the wetland soil, you're going to cover up the wetland soil with a bridge or with asphalt. I'm not sure what the difference would actually be. And other than maybe you'd modify how you drain the soil there underneath. But other than that, I'm not sure they would gain much in given the expense. Particularly for this particular, thing. And then again, we're talking about a wetland, presumably, that was created as a result of previous construction.
True. And there are lots of created wetlands around the town where people have done things. But this one, I'm not sure how long this has been there. certainly less than 11, excuse me, than 11 years.
Mhm.
So, I mean, sure, the functions, the biological functions of the wetland soil there are probably limited, at the very least. It seems to me that we really don't have any other choice other than to permit this crossing.
I have to say, I do appreciate the rain garden. I think that was a,
Yeah, that's very good. I do too. Okay. I thought that
Yeah,
was a good
Dave.
idea.
Dave, I feel the same way. I think given the presentations, given the fact that the expert that we hired spoke in favor of this iteration, given the fact that we permitted this 10 years ago, and basically other than that crossing, it's still in the upland review area. I'm not sure about your question, Gary, about soil running through the Gabbian Wall, but we should have asked that during the public hearing, and then that would have been something, yeah, that we had on record that we could speak to, because we're not experts about that. So
I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate the fact that we make our decisions on basically what we heard in the public record completely. Okay.
I do think that we can ask them to not use salt in or pesticides and herbicides. That would be a fair thing.
definitely.
But other than that, I feel like, wait.
I have not drafted a motion. Wasn't sure whether you were going to continue the hearing if you needed more information, or so I will have one prepared for you at the next meeting.
All right, and I agree with Eunice that we got to limit salt and pesticides and fertilizer on the property. That's unenforceable, I realize.
Yeah.
But it's on the paper anyway.
It's not unenforceable.
How about an alternative of using best management practices, okay, in terms of the use of those things?
Right. I will draft up some suggested conditions for you to review and edit at the next meeting.
All right.
I wonder how they're going to drain the pool where the water's going to go when they change it.
On the road.
We're going to have a long hose all the way out to Star Street.
I know most people, they'll take a hose and stick it over the Gabbian Wall and drain it into the wetlands.
We do that too.
Gotta watch that chlorine.
I hate to sound cynical, but I've seen it enough.
Okay.
All right, we have 2 minutes to approve. November 10th and November 29th.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 10th and November 29th.
We have a second
Second,
discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstained from the 29th.
Okay. Pardon my voice, it's not good.
Dave, I'm proud of you. You've hung tough.
Seriously.
Yeah, after a week in the hospital, I'll do that to you. All right, we have a pending application for Swan Lane. We're on the site walk there. And there's a draft motion, which you should have.
I make a motion to approve the construction of a 10 by 16 rear deck at 12 Swan Lane in Mystic. To approve the Swan Lane application for the following reason: there's no loss of wetland or watercourse associated with this application. And number 2, the deck is constructed over existing gravel and will not cause any additional land disturbance or erosion. This permit is subject to the 4 standard conditions. And I'd just like to add one condition, and that is that the stairs, Deb will be able to help me with this, but I don't want them to come towards the wetland. I want them to come towards the yard, the shed, however that goes.
So this is Bruce's application, but is there maybe there's a direction you can suggest? Southeast? What do you think, Bruce?
Well, I think we could just say, I mean, this is just a suggestion, but we could just say that the stairs are, you know, either northwest or southeast, but not southwest towards the well.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have a second on this?
Second,
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. I think I don't have anything. Deb, do you have anything else?
I do not. Bruce, do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything else.
I noticed that High Street lot is looking up.
Yes, it is. I sent out an email on that. I don't know, I guess it was last month at some point, with some pictures. I did go out there. I met the applicant there. It looked really good. Everything was complete. The boulders were in place. The slope was gradual as it could be, but in conformance with the plan. And it was fully grassed and vegetated. And yeah, I was very impressed with the way that site's looking now. Yeah.
All right. I'll call for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second it.
Second.
Second.
Oh, Gary's gonna second. Okay.
That's so good.
Signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? Have a Merry Christmas.
Same to you guys. Feel
You
better.
too.
Dave.
Holidays.
Happy holiday, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night.